900 souls, 150 miles from land, and a fire that refused to die. On November 30th, 1994, the Italian cruise liner Achille Lauro became a floating inferno in the Arabian Sea. But this wasn't just any ship meeting a tragic end. The Blue Lady, as she was known, had already survived World War II bombing raids, a terrorist hijacking that shocked the world, and multiple fires. This time, her luck had finally run out. And aboard was a man who had already survived one impossible shipwreck and was about to survive another. The story begins in 1939 in a shipyard in Vlissingen, southern Netherlands. Rotterdam Lloyd needed a flagship to compete with the popular Oranje, so they laid the keel of a magnificent 20,000-ton liner. But before she could taste the sea, the Second World War intervened. German bombers pounded the shipyard. The Nazis seized the unfinished hull for themselves, but Dutch resistance fighters sabotaged construction at every turn. Royal Air Force bombing raids finished the job. Eventually, the Germans abandoned her. After liberation, work resumed. The ship was christened Willem Ruijs, not after the company founder, but after a company director who had been taken hostage and shot by the Germans during the occupation. A ship born of resistance. On December 2nd, 1947, the Willem Ruijs finally embarked on her maiden voyage. At 630 feet long, she was striking, sleek smokestacks, and revolutionary aluminum lifeboats on lower decks. This design would become standard on every modern cruise ship. For over a decade, the Willem Ruijs served transport routes to Indonesia and later crossed the Atlantic between Europe and North America. But by the late 1950s, the shipping industry was changing. In 1958, her owners joined forces with Netherlands Line, and the vessel was sent to Amsterdam for a dramatic transformation from working liner to pleasure cruiser. Air conditioning was installed, underwater stabilizers were added, the rigid four-class system was abolished. The Willem Ruijs emerged as a cruise ship for a new era. Yet this new chapter would be short-lived. By 1965, the jet age had arrived, and passenger ships were suddenly obsolete. The vessel was put up for sale. In 1965, an Italian company called Achille Lauro purchased the aging liner. She was renamed Achille Lauro after the company's owner and brought into dry dock for an extensive rebuild. Large sections were gutted, mechanical systems were modernized. The superstructure was redesigned. The vintage masts were removed, replaced by tall, sleek smokestacks. 2 swimming pools graced the aft sun decks. Most notably, the ship was painted in the cruise line's signature blue, a striking livery that would earn her the nickname the Blue Lady. Private balconies, extremely rare for the era, added a touch of luxury. But the transformation wasn't without incident. In August 1965, an explosion ripped the ship, sparking a fire that delayed her relaunch. It was an ominous sign of things to come. The Achille Lauro sailed again in 1966, reborn as a sleek Italian cruise liner. European tourists flocked to her decks, but trouble seemed to follow the Blue Lady wherever she went. In April 1975, she collided with a livestock carrier called the Yusuf. The cargo ship sank. The Achille Lauro sailed away with barely a scratch. Later, while chartered for cruises around South Africa, another fire broke out aboard. The ship was temporarily removed from service. Meanwhile, Achille Lauro had gone bankrupt. The Achille Lauro was repaired, then laid up, her future uncertain. In 1985, Chandris Lines chartered the vessel, bringing her back to service. But her reputation was about to get dramatically worse. October 7, 1985. The Achille Lauro was sailing from Alexandria toward Israel when 4 armed men emerged from among the passengers. They were militants from the Palestine Liberation Front, led by a man named Abu Abbas. They had specifically chosen this ship because of its wheelchair accessibility. Within minutes, they had seized control, holding over 400 passengers and crew hostage. Ringleader Youssef Majed al-Mulki directed the captain to sail towards Syria, demanding the release of 50 Palestinians from Israeli prisons. Syria refused them port. The situation deteriorated. The hijackers selected an American passenger, 69-year-old Leon Klinghoffer, paralyzed on his right side and confined to a wheelchair. Al-Mulki later explained they chose him to show they had no pity for anybody. They shot Klinghoffer in the forehead and chest. Then they forced the ship's barber and a waiter to throw his body and wheelchair overboard. His wife Marilyn was told he had been moved to the infirmary. She only learned the truth after the ordeal ended. After days of tense negotiations, the terrorists surrendered at Port Said. They boarded an Egyptian aircraft, believing they would escape. But President Ronald Reagan had other plans. He ordered American F-14 fighters to intercept the plane. They forced it to land at a NATO airbase in Sicily, where Italian authorities took the hijackers into custody. An Italian court convicted 3 of the terrorists, sentencing them to prison terms of 15 to 30 years. Abu Abbas escaped and wouldn't accept responsibility until 1997, when the PLO finally reached a settlement with the Klinghoffer family. The Achille Lauro had become synonymous with tragedy. Yet the Blue Lady would sail again. In 1989, she was purchased by Star Lauro Cruises, which had just been acquired by Mediterranean Shipping Company. They were attempting to enter the cruise business, and the infamous liner would be their flagship. By the early 1990s, the Achille Lauro had settled into a new role, longer specialty cruises around the world. Despite her troubled past, passengers loved her. She was a classic, a survivor. In November 1994, the vessel departed Genoa, Italy, bound for the Seychelles. After a stop in Egypt, she transited the Suez Canal and rounded the Horn of Africa. Among those aboard was a British entertainer named Moss Hills, the ship's guitarist. The name might sound familiar. Just 3 years earlier, Moss had been aboard the Oceanos when that cruise ship sank off the coast of South Africa. He had become a hero that night, helping coordinate the rescue. Now, incredibly, he found himself performing aboard another aging vessel, sailing through the Arabian Sea. It was just after midnight on November 30th when everything changed. Moss and his wife were performing in one of the ship's lounges when several passengers approached with alarming news. They had seen smoke rising from the pool deck. Together they climbed the stairs to investigate. The smell hit them immediately, not the usual engine odor but something more sinister, an acrid chemical burning. Crew members were already there, desperately trying to deploy fire hoses. Moss helped them spray water onto the flames, but they were making a critical mistake. The fire was coming from the engine room below. It was an oil-based blaze. Water would only make it spread faster. Within minutes, the flames were roaring out of control. The captain made the decision quickly. All passengers were ordered to the upper decks. Preparations began to abandon ship if the fire could not be contained. Guests congregated topside while the ship's entertainers did their best to keep everyone calm. The power had failed. The Achille Lauro was now drifting, completely dark, across a pitch-black sea. Through the night, the crew battled desperately. They formed human chains, passing buckets of pool water to pour on flames erupting from the funnel. It was medieval firefighting on a modern cruise ship. But launching lifeboats in total darkness was deemed too dangerous. The passengers would have to wait. From the deck, they watched the crew losing their battle, flames reflected in their terrified eyes. As the ship began listing to port from all the water pumped below, panic set in among some passengers. One elderly man became frantic. He needed medication from his cabin. Without it, he would die. Moss made a decision. He grabbed towels from around the pool, soaked them in water, and wrapped them around his body and face, leaving only his eyes exposed. Then he descended into the smoke-filled corridors. The visibility was nearly zero. He could barely breathe through the wet fabric. He reached a fire screen door, wrestled it open, and pushed deeper into the choking darkness. But the smoke was too thick. He was choking, suffocating. He turned back, only to find the fire door handle broken from this side. He was trapped. Fighting down panic, Moss remembered the ship's layout. There was a small bar on this deck that opened onto the pool area. If he could find it in the darkness, he might escape. Feeling his way along the walls, choking on smoke, he found the bar door. It was open. He stumbled inside, climbed over the counter, and burst onto the open pool deck, gasping for air. By now, the ship's list had worsened. With dawn breaking, the captain finally gave the order to launch lifeboats. Group by group, terrified passengers descended into the boats and were lowered to the sea. The Achille Lauro was drifting over 150 miles from the nearest land. It would be hours before rescue ships could reach them. The passengers in lifeboats could only watch as the Blue Lady burned. Moss was among the last groups assigned to evacuate. By now, the fire was completely out of control. Thick black smoke poured from every door and vent. As his group reached the final 2 lifeboats, disaster struck again. The fire had blown out portholes along the hull. Flames shot horizontally from the side of the ship, directly beneath their lifeboats. They were being cooked alive. There was no choice but to abandon the lifeboats and retreat to the stern. Over 150 people remained aboard with no way off. At the aft rope decks, away from the worst of the smoke, Moss and the crew devised a desperate plan. They would use inflatable life rafts and rope ladders to escape down the curving hull. One by one, they threw the heavy raft canisters overboard and watched them inflate on the water below. Then came the terrifying part, climbing down. The rope ladder dangled 50 feet down the stern. Because of the ship's curved hull, the last 15 feet swung free in open air. You had to drop into the water and swim to the rafts. As they prepared to deploy a second raft, tragedy struck. A lifeboat that had been trapped against the hull suddenly swung free on a swell. It struck several passengers, hitting one man with devastating force. He didn't survive the impact, but there was no time to mourn. The fire was closing in. One by one, elderly passengers and crew climbed over the railing and began the terrifying descent. Finally, with the Achille Lauro listing at nearly 20 degrees, Captain Giuseppe Orsi and his officers were the last to descend. They reached the rafts around 11 in the morning, nearly 12 hours after the fire began. From the tiny rafts, they watched the Blue Lady drift away. Flames now engulfed the entire starboard superstructure. Black smoke mixed with the morning sky. It was, Moss would later say, a horrifying sight. That ship had been his home. The passengers in motorized lifeboats were soon picked up by the Hawaiian King, an oil tanker that had responded to the distress call. American warships USS Gettysburg and USS Halliburton rushed to the scene. Bulk carriers Bardu and Treasure Island took survivors aboard. But for Moss and those in the rafts, it would be hours more before a cement carrier arrived to pull them from the sea. As they waited, they could only watch their ship burn on the horizon. As night fell, the survivors were finally brought to port. Their ordeal was over, but the Achille Lauro's was not. She burned through the night and into the next day. Reconnaissance flights captured shocking images, the entire superstructure charred black, flames still raging, smoke stretching for miles. A firefighting tugboat was dispatched to attempt a tow, but at 6:10 p.m. on December the 2nd, 42 hours after the fire began, the Achille Lauro exploded, capsized and slipped beneath the waves. She sank in waters over 14,000 feet deep, deeper than the Titanic. There are no known photographs of her final plunge. The Blue Lady simply vanished, taking her secrets with her. Of the 979 people aboard, only 4 perished. German passenger Gerhard Schimke and British passenger Edward Morris both suffered fatal heart attacks during the rescue, the stress too much for their aging hearts. One man was struck by the swinging lifeboat, and a Dutch passenger vanished, likely lost attempting to retrieve belongings from his cabin. Survivors later complained the ship was a death trap. Lifeboats had jammed during lowering, oars were rotten, rudders broke off. Alarm systems didn't work, stewards had to bang on cabin doors to wake passengers. The investigation pointed to a crankcase explosion in engines running since 1944, 50 years of service. Moss Hills had now survived 2 cruise ship disasters in 3 years. Both times, he had gone far beyond his duties as an entertainer. Robin Boltman, another Oceanos survivor, had also been aboard. The universe, it seemed, had a dark sense of humor. Lauro collected £11 million in insurance. A year later, they rebranded as MSC Cruises. Today, they're the third largest cruise line in the world. The wreck of the Achille Lauro has never been found. At 14,000 feet deep, 125 miles off the coast of Somalia, she may never be located. But perhaps that's fitting. The Blue Lady lived a life unlike any other ship, surviving World War, terrorist hijacking, multiple fires, and decades of service across 3 different names and countless owners. In her final hours, passengers and crew came together against impossible odds. The captain stayed until the very end. An entertainer risked his life descending into smoke-filled corridors. Elderly passengers climbed rope ladders 50 feet down a burning hull. They played her unofficial theme song, La Nave Bleue, every time she entered port. The Blue Lady is gone now, lost to the depths, but those who sailed on her will never forget.